All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be joining us. We are really excited for a number of reasons to welcome all of you to the December 2019 edition of FSMA Fridays. So happy Friday, happy holidays, happy New Year. And as we were just discussing, not only is this the last one of the year, it's the last one of the decade. So let that settle in and marinate for a minute. So, boy, a lot to cover here today. And as we always like to do, we get to bring in Mr. Acheson here at the end of the year. So I'll introduce him in just a moment. But this should be a lot of fun as we kind of tackle some of the topics that have come up over the last year, think a little bit about what's come, and dig into a few of the hot topics that had been really buzzing around, and get the feedback from him and his team on what they're seeing out in the field. So we're glad you're here, and we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you that might be joining for the first time, and we got a lot of cool notes from you, so we appreciate that. We're excited to have you. This is the longest standing industry update. I believe next year we'll be going into, I want to say, our 6th year, maybe even 7th. I got to go double check, but it's certainly been more than 5 or 6 years. So we try and cover what's going on in FSMA, regulatory changes, updates, but we're really shifting more around to the operational side, and trends and strategies and technologies, and trying to talk about things that you're up against each and every day in your business. So we still have the FSMA DNA, if you will, as a core of what we talk about here, but we're really trying to expand the type of topics we get into beyond food safety, getting into quality and production, and a whole lot of other things. So we do these for you, and we certainly hope that you'll continue to join us, share the ideas that you have around topics you want to hear, and even questions that you're looking for answers to. And as we've done so since the very beginning, we have co-hosted and sponsored this with our friends and partners over at TAG, also known as the Acheson Group, who are the industry leading folks around food safety consulting, amongst many other areas in your business. So I know a number of you have worked with them, are still working with them, and it's really one of the great home field advantages we have, not just for our customers, but for this community we're building together, for a chance to listen to them and ask questions directly. So this is a really unique and fun opportunity, and something that we're very proud of and feels very important to make sure we bring to the food safety community here. So kind of normal agenda for us, a few housekeeping items here. One is we encourage you to ask questions, right? So that's what makes this format very informal, but hopefully very informative. So fire those away. There's a little question box on the right-hand side of your control panel, and I'll monitor those, and we'll get to as many as we can. But I've been assured that we can fire off those to David and his team. If we don't have quite enough time, we'll take those offline and share them in our LinkedIn group. Also notice just the panelists are displayed. So when you do send those, they're just coming to myself and our team here. And the number one most common question I'll cover up front here is, yes, we are recording these. We actually have an entire library of all the FSMA Fridays topics, which is really great. You can find those on our website, but we'll also share a direct recording link to this session along with some of the slides as well, if those are helpful and you want to pass them around. And if you have any audio issues, there are 2 ways to join us: one by phone, or you can click the button to connect on computer audio. We do have a team standing by, so if you're having any technical issues, you can use your chat button, and they'll do their best to help you out behind the scenes. So today we're going to dig into a quick FSMA update, but we're really going to get into kind of a recap of 2019 and a look forward to 2020, and take your questions as well. So with that, I'm going to bring in the man of the hour, Dr. David Acheson. He's the CEO and president over at the Acheson Group. I'm sure many of you, as I noted, have either worked with him and his team, heard him speak, have followed some of the work that he has published. For those of you that for some reason may not know, he has an amazing bio, which I could spend plenty of time reading, but I think one of the more fascinating things about Dr. Acheson is that the involvement that he had. He was the chief medical officer at the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service, and then in 2002 joined the FDA, and was a very big part in the development of the 2007 Food Protection Plan, which was really the foundation for FSMA. So with that, really excited to have you back, Dr. Acheson. So welcome. First, make sure you can hear us okay, and we're glad you're here.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. After that introduction, there's only one way for us to go, and that's downhill. But we'll try to reverse that. So
we're finishing the decade, my friend. This is going to be amazing.
I know that makes me feel really ancient, and maybe there's even people on FSMA Friday who've been with us since the beginning. So great to be back on FSMA Friday. It's great to be here.
There's a lot of truth in that. We meet a lot of folks that have been here since the beginning, and it's been a heck of a decade for FSQA and the food industry in general. And so before we dig into the year, we do want to make sure, there's always stuff moving, especially as we get close to the end of the year. So anything that's on the radar for you and your team in terms of recent FSMA activities that we should be aware of, or any thoughts around things we should be thinking about?
Yeah, there's always something going on with FSMA. I mean, it's been around now a long time, but there's always little bits and pieces that come out that track back to the original statutes. And as the FDA fills in some of the gaps, other than the major 7 pillars of FSMA, so I thought I'd just touch on one of those that came out just very recently, which relates to actually. To get a little technical here, it's Section 202 of FSMA, which is talking about lab accreditation. And those who track FSMA and know a little bit about lab testing will know that effectively, unless you are on an import alert, the FDA hasn't required you to use an accredited lab. And just recently, they put out, a couple of months ago, they issued a proposed rule around lab accreditation, which, interesting to me, had a little sleeper in it. Part of it was related to import alerts and accreditation, which makes total sense. And I think that was really the intent of the statute. But in this proposed regulation is a section about the agency proposing to establish a new regulatory tool. And of course, whenever you read the words "new regulatory tool," it's like, where's this going?
Sure.
And it's called It's called a food testing order. So it's like, well, what's that about? Food testing order, and there's a lot of detail in this proposed rule. But to me, the essence of this is that the FDA believes they have the authority, and this wasn't actually explicitly stated in the statute. But they've obviously looked at this. I'm sure they've had lawyers crawling all over it. And they believe that they have the authority to in certain conditions, require food companies to embark on testing programs using an accredited lab. And my interpretation of that is that in certain circumstances, and the example that they sort of pull out, and I see this fitting, is, let's play the scenario, which sadly we're all somewhat familiar with, is the FDA has come into your plant and either randomly has done a swabathon, or they're doing a swabathon because they've had illness claims linked back to your plant, or they found listeria in a finished product. It's usually listeria. They come in and they do a swabathon and they find problems. They find listeria species or mono or something like that. And you get the inevitable 483, and it's like, what are you going to do about it? And part of your strategy is, well, we're going to do a lot more testing. We're going to ramp up the programs. We're going to do this. We're going to do that.
Sure.
But we are going to control the risk through increased finished product testing and zone 1 contact surface testing, which is not that an unusual response. I think where this rule is going is that the FDA is going to say, all right, we buy that, but we are going to require you to use an accredited lab, and you will have to send us the data as you get it. That's where I see a bit of an interesting spin going on here, Brian. This looks like they're basically saying, under these conditions, we're going to tell you need to do testing, or if you say I'm going to do testing, then they want the data. And this could get very interesting because, again, I've seen many times where a company embarks on one of these more aggressive testing programs, they find things, which is what it's all about. They control the risk, and only sort of after the fact does FDA come in. But if the FDA is getting this data real time, I could see life getting interesting. Let's just leave it at that. But this is, there's always that. So I thought I'd just bring, for those of you who haven't tracked with this, take a look at it. There's some documentation came out from the FDA, and it's a proposed rule around lab accreditation. But the only other thing I'd mention, and we're going to talk a little bit more in a second about produce, of course we are, is that the FDA has ramped up their testing on produce, and they've also more aggressively embarking on enforcing the produce rule, which again isn't exactly new news, but it's sort of recent FSMA activities. So FSMA is still delivering. There's still surprises, and I suspect we'll get more in 2020, which I'll touch on in a second. So back to you, Brian.
That's perfect. That sets us up, and I think that's a good example of the nuances of all these things that are constantly coming at the folks that are listening today. So what we thought we would do today while we had you is first take a look back, and then, like you mentioned, there's a few hot topics like the produce rule, and it's always great to get your take on it, both from your background, but also what you're doing in your practice at TAG. So let's start first with 2019 and kind of looking back at the regulatory focus, and what was the most common things you guys were coming up against, or what should we take away from this past year in terms of regulatory focus?
Two things I want to just touch on here. The regulatory focus is the agency are very definitely ramping up their FSMA inspections. They're out there. They're looking at records. Sometimes they're very focused. They may be just targeted on GMPs. They may be targeted on recall plans or food safety plans. I think there's two areas where I've seen in our business things that I'd like to share with the group on the call today. The first is they've issued a number of 483s around compliance with the Foreign Supply Verification Program. So for most manufacturers and processors who are under the preventive control rule, that whole supply chain control part folds in under the preventive control rules. I'm going to come back to that in a second because that's the second area. But if you're on the call and you're an importer, then do make sure that your foreign supply verification program is robust and complete, because the FDA is looking at that. They are going in there and they're being pretty aggressive, and they're issuing 483s. And we've had a lot of calls from companies asking for help with structuring their foreign supply verification program, which then leads me into the second point, which is just a little bit more, I think, concerning. In that, in fact, I had a question this week from somebody that was, we just had an inspection from the FDA. They looked at our supply chain control program, and we use GFSI audits as our third-party audit for compliance with supply chain risk control. And to put that in the context, as I'm sure everybody on the call knows, is that the FSMA supply chain control sections require you to have an annual third-party audit if your assessment has determined that you have a Class 1 level risk. So it goes with risk. If Class 1 level risk, you require the third-party audit. And the default in the industry, which I've supported because it seemed like, well, there's no other way to go, is to use the GFSI audit that a lot of companies have of their suppliers. I've seen this now 3 or 4 times where an inspector has said a GFSI audit isn't adequate. And it's like, what? Then what is? What do you expect? And I think what's happening is that the industry is saying, oh, yeah, we've got the routine GFSI audit, we're fine. And they file that as part of their supplier approval program. I think where FDA is saying is like, well, there's nothing wrong with that audit, but did that audit specifically address the risk that you found when you did your risk assessment on that ingredient from that supplier? So to put this in context, Brian, if you've got a supplier, you do need to do your risk analysis of the ingredient of the product that you're receiving from that supplier. And if through that you've, say, identified salmonella in an ingredient in which you are relying on the supplier to control the risk, you've identified a very specific risk. Just getting a generic GFSI audit, the FDA sort of saying, well, does that really show that that supplier is controlling that salmonella risk? And I think if you don't, if in your approval program you don't actually connect those dots and say, well, we've identified salmonella in that ingredient, we've got the GFSI audit, and that audit specifically looked at their process control around that risk, and we believe it's good. So we've got some vulnerabilities creeping in there, and I think the industry default has been to say, GFSI audit, we're good. We don't even need to think about it. So just a bit of a watch out on that going forward. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, more FSMA inspections. It's ramping up. Obviously, they're still on a learning curve. I'm still getting sort of quite a few signals that the inspectors are learning as they go, which always is a little. I understand it, but it's always a little disconcerting. But plenty going on.
That makes sense. It's interesting. The story you just told, or that example, was almost very closely aligned with one of our very first questions. So it's being echoed already. And we appreciate all the questions we're already seeing coming in. Like we said, we'll get to as many of these as we can. I want to move, and I'm keenly interested in your take on this, because if anyone follows any key figures from the FDA, and so certainly in social media, you see this phrase almost every day, I think. So David, what is the new era of food safety, and where are we going next year, and maybe in the short term with all of this?
You could almost broaden that and say, where's the next decade going to take us, Brian? As we sort of talk about, we're just wrapping up a decade. To me, this is sort of reflective of, and the reason why I thought this would be a good thing to talk about is the publication that came out from FDA not very long ago around ideas on how to begin a new era of smarter food safety. And for those that haven't actually seen that, it makes an interesting read. It's a relatively short document. It's like 5 or 6 pages, but it picks out the areas where the FDA is going to focus around smarter food safety. And not surprisingly, given the current Deputy Commissioner for Foods, Frank Yanis's approach and the role he played at Walmart, is there's a lot of talk in here about traceability and about artificial intelligence and using data, and of course, food safety culture. So if I was to boil this down to a few key elements, I'd say data handling, traceability. Obviously, there's a theme of prevention, improving response times, which I think is as much a message for the regulators as it is for the industry. Data analytics and food safety culture is sort of the areas that they are going. The other thing that I noted in this sort of where the FDA may be headed in the smarter era is there is one of the little sections in here is called Enhanced Traditional Retail Food Safety, and emphasis on retail. And as anybody who's in the retail and food service industry will know, the sort of the regulatory backbone of all of that is a guidance called the Food Code. And the Food Code is a guidance document that the FDA publishes on a regular basis that is then turned into requirements at the state level. And the first line of this related to the enhancing traditional retail food safety states, and I quote, expand the Food Code to require industry and food safety management systems for retail establishments.
Interesting.
It's a little one-liner. It sort of goes to sleep. You don't notice it, but require industry? So is the food code going to be mandatory at the federal level? Right now, it isn't. Will it make a difference? Probably, because there are state-to-state variations. But and again, this is a roadmap. This doesn't mean that the FDA will go down this road anytime soon. But it's sort of indicative of where you're sort of starting to see some of the directions that they want to go in. Another area on this one, Brian, is e-commerce, home delivery, meal kits, which again is a phenomena that we really didn't think about 10 years ago, but is now part of life, with home delivery and meal kits. And obviously the fortunes of some of those meal kit companies have gone up and gone down and gone up and gone down, but they're still around, and they're not going to go away. But home delivery is obviously growing like crazy, and is a somewhat unregulated area for QSRs and retail. Lucrative, makes sense. E-commerce, easy. It's the way to go, but it's a little bit of the Wild West in terms of once that food gets loaded in the back of somebody's vehicle. It's like, what's gonna happen to it, and it is a somewhat unregulated space. So I I think if we look at the next decade of FDA and food safety and where are we going, there's plenty of things that are going to pop up. Some new that I've just touched on, and of course a couple of old chestnuts, which I think we might get to in a minute. So back to you, Brian.
No, that makes sense. We're seeing the same, the data handling, traceability, and I want to give credit particularly to the types of folks that are on this call. I think people want to be smarter and better, and we're seeing proactive questions and inquiries about how they can get ahead of this. So I think the industry as a whole is trying to get better and smarter and faster. So credit to all of you and all hard work and what you're up against to make that transition. We see a lot of you doing some really great stuff out there. So proud to work with you and help on that. This ties in, I guess, with the next question here, which is around product tracking regulations, and you started to touch on a little bit of those, and we've seen a couple questions even coming in around this. So you want to expand a little bit on where you see that going?
Yeah, I do. And to maintain the FSMA theme, Brian, and I'm showing my age here, is when the FSMA statute was originally being discussed, and that was when I was still at the agency, so we were in sort of the 2008 timeframe. So we're going back a long time. One of the specific sections that was put in an early draft from the House, it was not a Senate thing, it was on the House side, was a requirement for food companies to have full pedigree traceability within 2 business days. Which means that if the FDA walks into a retail store and says, all right, where did you get those peppers from? Then that store would be required to go all the way back to the field within 2 days. That got shot down in flames by almost everybody, because it's like it's not feasible, it's not economically feasible, it's not technically feasible. Right. We've since learned that it is technically feasible to do that. Is there interest in driving it from an economic perspective? That's a whole other question. But let's keep it in the context of the Food Safety Modernization Act, the topic of today. And that request from the House to do full pedigree traceability within 2 days morphed into the current language in the FSMA statute, which for those who are FSMA statute boffins, it's section 204 that I'm referring to, in which the FDA has authority to enhance traceability programs. If you read section 204, it really doesn't give the FDA much more than what they already had. which was one up, one back, which a lot of people think, oh, that was a FSMA rule. Actually, it wasn't. It came out of the Bioterrorism Act. So that the old one up, one back notion, which only actually applies to registered firms, which is manufacturers, processors, packers, and holders, doesn't apply to farms, doesn't apply to retail, doesn't apply to food service. That one up, one back is where we sit today. That is still the law. And in that Section 204 explicitly prohibits the FDA from requiring full pedigree traceability. So they are not only not, they don't have the legal authority to require it, they've been told don't do it. So in order for FDA to require end-to-end traceability, they don't have, I don't believe that they have the legal authority to do it. In the Where's FDA Going document that I was talking about earlier, there is a section here which calls itself Facilitate End-to-End Traceability Throughout the Food Safety System, and that's where we need to go. That is what I think FDA is going to be trying to advance, trying to encourage, but they cannot, in my belief, based on their legal authorities, actually require it. But we desperately need better systems when we have these outbreaks that are going on, and a regulator walks into a restaurant or retail and asks them, okay, where was that product? Where did it come from? And meanwhile, the product is gone, the case is gone, the records have gone. Sure. There's very little information. And if we could very quickly track back to growing fields, growing conditions, I think we could triangulate problems a whole lot faster. Yeah. And basically, again, this is very much pertains to produce. This discussion on traceability is always in the context of produce. It's not in the context of packaged goods, because they've got a lot of information on them. They've got longer shelf lives. Right. Typically, they have lot codes, they have production dates, they have use by dates, lots and lots and lots and lots of data that feed right back, and you can say, okay, I know when this was made, I know where it was made, I know the ingredients that we used, I know when we sourced them. It's the produce industry where this just continues to be a major hurdle, and the FDA is lacking authority to change it. So I think we're stuck with the regs that we've got. That Section 204 in FSMA really doesn't give FDA very much, other than to require certain firms who are designated as higher risk to carry more information about where they received food from and where it went. Which gets us into the next point: is will the FDA publish their high-risk food list? And they've been pushed to do that, and I personally am not an advocate of that. I don't want to see a high-risk food list, because it will damage the reputations of anybody who's on it, and it almost provides a false sense of security. Well, if I'm not on the high-risk list, then I'm low risk and I don't need to worry so much, and that's a dangerous precedent. We've seen many examples where low risk becomes high risk overnight. So this is a very, very interesting space, and I think that the FDA is actually lacking regulatory teeth to be able to do a whole lot more than they're already doing. So definitely a space to watch. It's a space that I feel really strongly is we need to do better. We need to find ways that are reducing risk, but at the same time providing logistic benefits to the industry around just in time, or less shrink, or less wastage, and it's a problem that's ripe for solving, but it has been for a long time. But I think we'll see product tracking, innovation next year, almost certainly. We have to, and if not next year, then soon thereafter. Yeah. Back to you, Brian.
It's clearly a direction. You obviously touched a lot on the produce side there, and it was obviously a hot topic. Even something came out this morning on this. So anything else that you would want to touch on in terms of the folks that are in produce listening in, and that you would add for this coming year?
Other than it has been and will continue to be a major focus. The FDA has launched a testing program. which is I've written about it in our weekly blog out of Tag, is that this is a program that I think inevitably they had to do. Doing 250 samples over the course of 6 or 9 months isn't realistically a public health prevention tool. It's not nearly enough, but this is sending a strong message to the industry, I think, of, okay, we got to do better. We've got to do better. We've got to do better. We've got to do better. And I think the challenge in the produce industry is there are so many random acts of bird behavior or whatever that you simply cannot control.
Sure.
And we spend, and this may rankle with some of the listeners, but I'll say it anyway. I'm certain that people who know me will know I'll say what I think. I think we need to take some of the money we're spending on testing produce, which is more about feel good than it is about reducing risk, and plow it into better product tracking. That's what I would be an advocate for. Is we're economically challenged. Margins are tight. We can't simply double the price of a head of romaine lettuce. We have to be smarter about where we're spending our dollars, and I would like to see us do that. I think we do a ton of testing, not because we want to, but because retailers and restaurants are forcing us to do it, and it's incrementally reducing risk. It's not without its impact, but it really doesn't effectively reduce risk, as we see repeatedly with outbreaks. So I think this space will continue to be very interesting, very dynamic in 2020 is the produce area.
Yep, it's going to take all of us to help. There's a big challenge to solve there together for sure, as you noted. Let's turn the corner to the finish line here, and just kind of looking in general. We've talked about some specifics, but 2020 and what you expect and kind of some what you're thinking about for the coming year, focused on.
Yeah, I think we've touched a lot about 2020 already, Brian. I think, traceability, produce, obvious areas, FSMA we've talked about, foreign supplier verification program. I think a very interesting space for 2020, which isn't FSMA related necessarily, will be where cannabis and the hemp industry goes.
Yeah, sure.
And particularly with regard to edibles and beverages. I was fortunate enough to go to the FDA public meeting in May, which was illustrative of the challenges that are being faced with FDA as to how to regulate this space. So I think there's desperate need for federal oversight one way or another, and they can't ban it. They simply can't outlaw it. They've got to manage it. And maybe we will see this space regulated through the same levels of preventive controls as we do for food already, conventional food. So I think that's a space. Whole genome sequencing is very much alive and well. I think the last statistic I saw was that the public health systems on the regulatory side and the CDC side are adding about 8,000 new sequences a month.
Wow.
And I anticipate that will climb, and is obviously being heavily leveraged to control risk and limit outbreaks and get in quick and early. So we will see that explode. Not FSMA, but anybody who's on the call from the meat and poultry industry, Campylobacter will probably become more of an issue over the next 12 months. We'll see standards creeping in on Campylobacter, which may be difficult to meet because we really don't have a good sense on how to control it at the farm level. Plant-based proteins continue to grow. We'll see that. Quality management systems, obviously close to the heart of safety chain, goes back to where we need to leverage data and preventive analytics and all those sorts of things. So absolutely no shortage of interesting things happening, both FSMA related and non-FSMA related in the regulatory world of food safety.
No, that's great, and I know you like to blog about this, and you've got a lot of good stuff on the blog, and they'll be coming. Any other predictions or things that you would want to add going into the new year, or final thoughts?
Not really. No, we've covered a lot of stuff
Yeah.
in the.
All right.
Actually, we've been running over 30 minutes,
We
so
are.
we've covered a bunch, Brian. So if we've got
Perfect.
time for a couple of questions, let's do that.
Yeah, I think we'll do that. We want to respect everyone's time, but for those that want to hang on, we'll try and cover a few of these with you. I think gonna try and pick a few out here, and the rest we'll try and take off offline here. First one, David, here is a question about if you can give an update on the sanitary transportation regulation, and specifically around enforcement on how it's being done, whether it's DOT or FDA.
Oh, that's a really interesting question. You know, that I've seen very little enforcement on that. It rarely comes up. The interactions that we've had with the transportation industry is really, it was like, oh, well, we're just going to regulate based on what was an industry best practice already, but we're sort of just going to ratify it through regulatory requirements. It rarely does it pop up as an issue. I don't think I've had a client reach out for a long time who said, okay, we've got a 483 around failure to comply with the sanitary transport rule. So this doesn't seem to be an area of focus. I'd certainly advocate that everybody meets the regulatory requirements, because I mean that is just a logical way of making sure that stuff is safe in terms of time temperature control and avoiding cross contact and making sure trucks are clean. But it hasn't been a regulatory focus that I've seen much, and I don't really see that changing. I think there's bigger areas that the FDA is focused on than that for the next 12 months.
Yeah, and I'll grab another one here that maybe kind of takes us a step further. So the question is, do you see the FDA backing off from environmental recalls without product positives? I know this is a hot topic.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
It's not quite weekly for us, but it's almost weekly, where we're working with a company that's had the FDA and they found some problems. And it's often not zone 1 or zone 2 or finished product. It's like, we believe you're producing product under insanitary conditions. Therefore, we have concerns that everything that you've made in commerce is adulterated. Fearful words that one has to navigate around very carefully. So no, I do not see that backing off. I see that actually, if anything, getting more aggressive. And I think that whole genome sequencing is leveraging that enormously, because that database is just growing. And when they come into your plant and they find either salmonella or listeria mono in the plant anywhere, even I haven't yet seen it in zone 4, but zone 3 for sure, multiple times, that tracks back to an illness that's in the database. And if they can make the epidemiological connection between that illness and your product, that's a bad day. So I see this getting worse. I mean, worse isn't the right, however you characterize it. More aggressive regulatory actions on that. Absolutely not backing off.
Right. Got it. Okay. Finish with one on labeling, which has come up a lot recently as well. Question around the updated FSMA requirements with 6 months to comply with adding nutritional panels. This person, Laura, has a very small package and as a result, small labeling. Wants to know, can they have the nutritional information on the paragraph form?
That's a very technical question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I will have to consult with one of our labeling experts at TAG. I don't know.
All right. That's good. Well, we are trying to stump you at least once, so that's great.
Yeah, right. That was a good one. Yeah, I know enough on labeling to be really dangerous, and so I'm not going to give an answer there, which could be incorrect. But if that's one we can capture, Brian, and we'll try to respond back directly to the person with that question.
That would be great. That'd be great. And we'll finish on a broad one. We have a great one. I think someone who's started where you started today, which was they just had an audit and the auditor recommended, hey, you need to really look back at the FSMA standard. And they said their partner and them had realized they don't really have a set of standards and they're struggling to figure out where to start online. So where would you recommend somebody starting that wants to get these things kind of in place?
Oh, well, that's a no-brainer. Just call me. called TAG.
There you go.
But that's an unabashed self-promotion. No, I mean, there are a lot of resources around FSMA. There's lots and lots and lots of information. Some of it's a bit overwhelming, but I think fundamentally, if you really are not sure where to begin, or there's a section of FSMA and you want to know, does it apply to me? Then absolutely. I mean, we'd love to have that sort of conversation, because that's typically where, and it begins and ends with that. It's like, well, you need to worry about this and about that and about that, and here's some pointers, and we can help you get started. And yet you don't need to worry about this aspect or that aspect or another aspect, because it doesn't pertain to you, or do this one first because the FDA is all over this one. And we'll help you navigate through both what to do, when to do it, and how to do it.
That's perfect, and a good place to finish. So, Allie, we're going to connect you with David and his team, because I think that's sage advice there. It can get pretty overwhelming. So with that, a few other resources. So one, I mentioned that, yes, we are recording this. We'll send out the link and the slides. So for those of you asking there, we'll get to those. And we have all of those posted on our website. So go to safetychain.com. There's a resources drop down. There's a section just for FSMA Fridays, and you can see the entire library there. It's awesome. So encourage you to check it out, because a lot of this is, while we do them month to month, a lot of this input and advice really is something that carries forward and is valuable well beyond then. Also, you've heard us mention the TAG newsletter and their blog. So the Acheson Group has a ton of great resources. So highly recommend making sure at a minimum you're on their newsletter list. But also in cases like we just talked about there for you, Allie, encourage you to reach out and connect with them directly to get some questions answered, and just talk about maybe how they can help your team coming into the year and doing some of your planning. We also have a LinkedIn group. So before you hop off today, encourage you go click over to LinkedIn, do a lookup for FSMA Fridays, join the group, and we'll welcome you in there. And a lot of the questions we'll take offline, we will post there as well. We're also going to start looking next year for more input from you coming into each of these sessions for some questions ahead of time to make sure we can cover and make these as applicable as possible. So please join us there, and we'll look forward to engaging with you. And speaking of engaging, the next one we'll do together is going to be in the next decade, David. It's going to be in January of 2020, end of the month, January 31st, will be the next FSMA Fridays show. And we'll look forward to having a lot of you. Please share this with your friends and colleagues. The more, the merrier. With that, I want to wish you all a very wonderful holiday and safe holiday season. And Dr. Acheson, we appreciate your partnership. Thank you for making time in a very, very busy time of year and schedule to be here. This was a perfect way to end the year and the decade. So thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Great pleasure. Great pleasure. And thanks for those who joined us and have joined us over multiple years of FSMA Friday, and look forward to the next 10 years.
Absolutely, we certainly do. And for those of you that are interested in learning more about how we work together with TAG, we've built a really neat tool around supplier risk assessment that we have some pre-recorded demos, and we can also share a little bit more information about that's making a big impact for our mutual customers around reducing and mitigating that risk. So you can check that out at info.safetychain.com/tag if you're doing some planning around your supplier management and supplier risk assessment for the coming year. So thank you everybody for joining us, for supporting FSMA Fridays, as many of you have for years, and we look forward to doing this again next year and into the next decade. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks everybody.